OLEDs have always had great picture. They have infinite contrast that makes colors pop and punchy, but their weakness has always been their peak brightness. Whether it be for full field brightness or specular highlights, well, LG has sought to fix that with the G series TVs, where it has a built-in heatsink to dissipate the heat from the panel, as well as custom algorithms to boost brightness output based on specific scenarios. The G series TVs have had that for a while, but their most recent addition has been the inclusion of a micro lens array, or MLA technology, where there are billions of tiny mirrors that are used to reflect the light that would have been otherwise lost back to the viewer, thus increasing the brightness output even more. This is the second year that this feature has been in the G series and the first year that it's been in the 83-inch version, which I happen to have behind me. This is the review. Stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. And before we get any deeper into the review, I want to talk about the 2024 TV Shootout put on by Value Electronics. It happened a few weeks ago at the beginning of August, where each year they crown the king of TVs for that year. It's been an event they put on for about 2 decades now, and it's attended by a lot of key folks in the industry. We're talking filmmakers, professional calibrators, tech journalists, reps and engineers from the major manufacturers, and more. And some of them are part of the panel of experts who examine and compare the TVs directly with a Sony BVM HX3 3110 reference monitor as the picture reference. It's an OLED TV with 4,000 nits of peak brightness, which is the newest version of the display a lot of Hollywood studios use to master their movies. And it's pretty much the gold standard of picture quality. The panel of experts compared the calibrated picture of all the TVs and scored them in the categories that you see here on screen. And to do that, they get really up close and inspect each TV and examine the different criteria ranging from color accuracy to highlight detail, tone mapping performance, among others, using real-world movie content and test patterns. This year I was lucky enough to attend, and I have to say it was a great experience. If you've seen the results already, you know that there was a 0.5 point difference between third and first place for this year's comparison. With the LG G4 coming in third, the Samsung S95D, which I also have here, coming in second, and the Sony A95L being crowned king of TVs for 2024. These are being 65-inch screened OLEDs, by the way. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, was just how close the TVs were when calibrated, but that also speaks a lot about how dedicated this group of folks are to examine the TVs in such detail to find out which really is the best, even when there's such a small difference between them. That said, in the calibrated test, the LG came in third in pretty much every category except one, HDR General, but not by much. So that goes to show you the caliber of performance you get in the G4, and at this price, you should. In the out-of-the-box comparison though, the LG managed to beat out the Samsung S95D for second place, and I can understand why that is, because it pretty much reflects my observation I made during the comparison of the 77-inch S95D and the 83-inch G4. So I want to thank Value Electronics and Robert for inviting me, and also for putting together events like this and the projector shootout every year so that us, the buying public, can make informed decisions. They support the channel too, so I've left links in the description if you want to buy any of the TVs at Value Electronics. They have great deals. Besides that though, they all have the 120Hz native panel with VRR support up to 144Hz, FreeSync and G-Sync support, as well as the Alpha 11 AI Super Scaling 4K processor. That's a lot, LG, that's a lot. 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, with HDMI 2 having the EARC port for lossless audio pass-through to your sound system, 1 Ethernet port, 3 USB 2.0 ports, an ATSC tuner, RS-232C, and optical inputs. It supports Dolby Vision, HLG, and HDR10 HDR standards, as well as Dolby Atmos sound and DTS:X pass-through. pretty much the same features of the past few years. Nothing much or really substantial has changed from last year besides the brightness of the TV and the picture processor. And I think only one of those things have a noticeable impact on the picture. I'll let you guess which one that is. But that doesn't mean it's not a noticeably better TV though. The TV also supports smart home platforms like Google, Alexa, and Apple HomeKit. It can be part of smart automations in your home. For example, I've had this one set up with an automation with the smart wings, smart blinds, since I have two large windows behind me that reflects on the TV. I've set up an automation which closes the blinds in the daytime when the TV is turned on and opens them again if it's turned off. And that automation only triggers in the daytime, but that's the kind of integration you can use to create some quality of life improvement in the experience on newer TVs such as the G4 here. First, let's start with a test of tone mapping, and the G4 has some of the best tone mapping I've seen in this test. There is noted definition in each section, so the highlights are separated as they should be, and so are the dark shadow areas. When it comes on to the tunnel test, it's more of the same, where there is ample definition in each section from the brightest areas of the pattern to the darkest. That's what you want to see, and in the next clip we'll see a real-world application of this in this HDR10 scene. The scene has a very high picture level, and even though the snow in the background is bright, it still maintains the details of the darker elements like the trees in the background. That said, the details in the HDR10 version of this test isn't quite as good as the details in the Dolby Vision version of this test. Interestingly, in the Dolby Vision version, we can see a lot more details in the trees in the background. So Dolby Vision then has a better control of the luminance on screen, more so than HDR10 does. In Dolby Vision, the TV is better able to tone map the details of the brighter elements on screen, much better than it does when using HDR10. Now let's do a test of low stimulus content. And with this, the TV also performed really well, where there is ample details in these low stimulus content, in contents that's even below 1 nit of brightness. The brightness of the lights below the TV doesn't actually change. What does change is the brightness of the screen and the exposure of the camera. So the camera gets more sensitive to capture the details of the image on screen, so the lights below the TV appear brighter because the camera has to get more sensitive. So we can use that as a control to see just how dim the brightness of the screen is for these low stimulus content. As we can see in this test pattern, when the rectangle is at its smallest, but as it grows, we can see where the brightness output really decreases. So we understand how much of a fall off in brightness there is as the elements on screen increase in size. This has always been an issue with OLED TVs, and we're hoping that with the implementation of the heatsink on the G4 that they could increase the overall picture level of the OLED, but there is still a big fall off in the brightness output from smaller elements with specular highlights to full field brightness. We'll see more of that when we actually measure the brightness output of the TV. Because of the instant pixel response of OLED TV, cinematic motion may appear to have judder, so the TV needs to have the de-judder setting at least enabled to, I think, 2 or 3 at minimum for it to smooth out the motion. That coupled with the de-blur setting, as they increase, then the motion interpolation gets better. Without it, motion looks kind of choppy, so I think you'll definitely need it. But when you're watching something fast-paced like sports, then you can increase the setting for a smoother experience, but increasing it does lead to some artifacting around the edges of objects, as we can see in this test right here. The running peppers tests here show how objects in motion appear to have judder as they pan across the screen. Enabling the settings lead to much smoother motion, as I said, with the caveat of the motion artifacting. The artifacting appears on pretty much every display I've tested to varying degrees. So far, Sony has had the best performance with the least amount of artifacting, but this G4 isn't quite at that level yet. Next is the quantization artifacts test, where we see how the TVs handle gradients and if it results in any posterization. On the 8-bit test, we can see where there's notable posterization on each of the test patterns, both on the chroma blue and chroma red on the left and right of the screen, and in the middle where it represents shadow detail, we can see where there is posterization as well. This improves in the 10-bit pattern where there's posterization on the chroma blue and chroma red test patterns, so the gradient isn't as smooth as one would expect, especially for a 10-bit image. We've seen where other TVs have done this much better and much smoother than the LG does here. In the middle test pattern, we see that there isn't quite as much posterization, but some still exists. Next, we'll test image retention, where we see how fast the TV can get rid of the remnants of a bright rectangle on a 15% gray slide. And just to be clear, this isn't a burn-in test. This is what happens when some bright elements are on screen of an OLED TV. After the element leaves, there is still a trace of the element remaining for a few seconds. In this case, the element is on screen for about 45 seconds. We've seen where on other TVs like the QD-OLED from Samsung, the S95C, where it's on screen for about a minute and a half. So the G4 does well here, which is no doubt thanks to the heatsink implementation on the TV. We measured the color accuracy using a colorimeter and Calman calibration software using the more accurate cinema mode. I like using the cinema mode versus the even more accurate filmmaker mode because it has just enough of the manufacturer's special sauce, the TV picture characteristics, without being wildly inaccurate like the vivid mode, for example. So we measure the TV in the accurate cinema mode to find the delta E. The delta E being a measurement of the deviation of the displayed color from the original source. And using a scale of 0 to 100, the TV has a delta E of 2, which is very good for an out-of-the-box picture. At that level, the deviation of color or grayscale inaccuracies are barely perceptible to the human eye without very close observation. I don't think there's any discernible change in picture processing and upscaling ability over the G3 that the G4 has. That's to say that it does it well and didn't have any egregious anomalies or artifacts. Especially, of course, on low-res, high-quality content like streaming TV. Of course, high-resolution content will look incredible, but really low-resolution content can look blocky and over-processed when blown up to the size of this TV, as one would expect. There are no miracles there. If you're interested in gaming on this TV, then know that it has every gaming feature you could need, like I mentioned in the specs, but it also performs really well. It has an input lag in game mode of 4.8 milliseconds at 120 Hz, or when you have the 144 Hz mode enabled that you have to do using the game bar. It also saves that setting so you don't have to enable it every time you use that specific input. At 60 Hz, the input lag is about 30 milliseconds, so it beats out a lot of computer monitors when it comes to gaming. And I can attest to that because since I've had this TV in this room, I haven't gamed at my desk even once. I've migrated to the sofa, which is a lot more comfortable, and doing that on this bigger display and with such vivid colors and contrast ends up being a better gaming experience, I think. The TV isn't quite as bright in game mode as it is in the movie mode, coming in at a bit over 1400 nits when in game mode compared to over 1500 nits in movie mode. But that isn't really too bad and the difference isn't really perceptible, but I would like to see the difference disappear though. So LG, I think you should work on that. Speaking of brightness, testing the reflectivity of the screen using my studio lights, we can see that this year's model gets bright enough to drown out most ambient light in brighter scenes. There is still going to be some reflections of brighter light sources even on brighter scenes, though not quite as bad as it appears on darker ones. During darker scenes, and because the black levels are so low on an OLED, it can get hard to discern shadow detail and the detail of darker scenes where gradation or details in the low lit elements are important. This is all, of course, just like what I saw on the 77-inch G3 last year. So again, the 83-inch TV is for those who want a bright OLED TV bigger than 77 inches. In a dark room though, that really isn't an issue, and that's where this TV really shines, as one would expect. As much as these newer brighter OLED TVs like this are more than capable of being used comfortably in a bright room, in the darkness is where you get the best of it. The infinite contrast from the individually controlled pixels leads to such high contrast that the TV has a high perceived saturation and vivid picture without the need to actually oversaturate the colors. This TV is pretty hot, and I mean that literally. Let's talk about that. OLED TVs have long produced a fair amount of heat when the screen is on, but this TV in this size has taken that to another level. Especially in this room, with the doors closed, this thing becomes a space heater. If I'm gaming with the added heat of the PC, forget about it. It's like 10 or so degrees hotter in this room than it is in the rest of the house. And that's with the AC on, by the way. Then there's the price. The TV launch price was about $6,500, and that's a lot to ask for an 85-inch TV. And yes, I know the larger a panel gets, then the more difficult it gets to produce them without defects, but a 44% increase in price for an 8% increase in screen size is a pretty tough sell. Also, although WebOS has come a long way in navigation and app availability with the most popular apps available on the platform, the store just seems littered with novel apps that have questionable usefulness. So then, who is this TV for? Well, I think it depends on your room mainly. There's a pretty big price premium over the 83-inch G3 from last year, and the main difference is the increased brightness. There's also a pretty big price jump from the 77-inch G4 from this year, as I mentioned earlier. So it makes sense to buy this TV if you need the brightest large screen OLED TV, and 77-inch just isn't enough for you. At this price, there are other options of larger TVs or TVs with better picture and processing, but not both. So if both are important to you, then the 83-inch G4 makes sense. If not, then I'd implore you to explore options like, for example, the other TVs mentioned in this year's TV Shootout. Both the OLED and Mini-LED Shootouts. I've left links in the description if you want to check them out. But those are my thoughts on the 83-inch G4. Stay tuned and subscribe for more upcoming videos on the 77-inch Samsung S95C OLED and 85-inch Hisense U8N ULED TV. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't. Until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood villain saying be safe and peace.